At 26, Dave Ramsey looked like he'd already won. A Jaguar in the driveway. Vacations that didn't require a second thought about the bill. A real estate portfolio worth something close to $4 million, growing by the month. To anyone watching from the outside, this was a man who had it figured out. But underneath the polish was a structure that could come apart with a single phone call. And one day that call came. A bank wanted its money, not eventually, not once the property sold. Now, on a timeline Ramsey had no way of meeting. He was about to learn something that no amount of paper wealth can teach you until it's too late. Owning valuable things is not the same as controlling your future. In a matter of years, the cars, the confidence, the whole appearance of success, gone. In 1988, Dave Ramsey and his wife Sharon filed for bankruptcy. But here's the part most people get wrong about that story. The bankruptcy wasn't the end of anything. It became the product, the philosophy, the foundation stone of a business empire that would eventually dwarf the fortune he lost. Today, Dave Ramsey is one of the most recognized voices in American finance, reaching millions of people every week through radio, podcasts, YouTube, books, live events, and financial courses. Nobody outside his inner circle knows exactly what he's worth. Ramsey Solutions is privately held. There's no audited statement of his assets sitting in a public filing somewhere. Estimates tend to land near $200 million, though Ramsey himself has suggested the true value of his company and property could run considerably higher. Take those numbers as directional, not definitive. What isn't up for debate is this. Dave Ramsey built one of the most valuable personal brands in finance. And the strange, almost poetic part of the story is that he built it out of the wreckage of his biggest failure. Ramsey got into real estate early, licensed while he was still a teenager, then formally trained in finance and real estate at the University of Tennessee. He was sharp, hungry, and fast. His method was simple in theory. Borrow from a bank, buy a property, flip it or refinance it for a profit, then do it again. When it worked quickly. Each deal built equity. Equity made him look wealthier on paper, and looking wealthier made the next loan easier to get. It was a cycle that fed itself, right up until it didn't. One of the banks financing his deals got bought out by a larger institution. The new owners looked at his loans and didn't like what they saw. They called them in, and that's when Ramsey ran into a truth that a lot of people never have to face this directly. Millions of dollars in property doesn't mean much when a debt has a deadline, and the real estate can't be sold fast enough to meet it. Equity doesn't pay a bill on demand, and whoever holds the loan holds the leverage, not the person holding the assets. Ramsey has said he spent months trying to sell his way out of it, scrambling to satisfy the bank's demands. It wasn't enough. By the time the bankruptcy was filed, he learned the lesson that would define the rest of his career. A high net worth on paper can hide a financial house with no foundation at all. What came after wasn't a rush back into real estate. It was something slower and stranger. Ramsey started studying money from the opposite direction. Not how to make it, but how people lose control of it. He began counseling others through his local church, sitting across from people drowning in credit card debt, car payments, mortgages they couldn't quite afford, and the particular shame that comes with financial trouble. And he noticed something. The fear he'd felt wasn't unique to him. It was everywhere. Millions of ordinary people were quietly living the same nightmare, just at a smaller scale. In 1992, he got a shot on a small Nashville radio program. No guarantees, no big production budget, no audience to speak of yet. But radio gave him something more valuable than a paycheck. It gave him reach. A way to talk about money the way people actually experience it. Not as spreadsheets and interest rates, but as fights at the kitchen table, sleepless nights, secrets kept from a spouse, and the sense that your future is already spoken for by next month's bills. That emotional honesty is what turned a local call-in show into The Ramsey Show. A program Ramsey Solutions says now reaches more than 18 million listeners a week across radio and digital platforms. But the show was never the whole business. It was the front door. Someone hears the show for free. Maybe they pick up one of his books next. Maybe they enroll in Financial Peace University or start budgeting with the EveryDollar app. Maybe they show up to a live event or get referred to a financial advisor through the company's SmartVestor network, a program Ramsey Solutions openly discloses it earns compensation from. Along the way, they might discover Churchill Mortgage, a long-time endorsed partner, or start following one of the other personalities the company has built around investing, careers, or personal growth. One audience, a dozen doors it can walk through. That's the real engineering behind the brand. Not a single product, but an entire ecosystem built around one transformation, moving a person from financial chaos to financial control. It's a strange kind of genius when you think about it. He didn't just sell advice. He built a system where every piece of content feeds the next without having to constantly go find a new audience to sell to. The radio show builds trust. The books give people a method. The courses turn the method into habits. The app makes those habits daily. The live events turn the habits into identity. And the referral network monetizes the exact moment a listener is ready for professional help. That's not content, that's architecture. While the media business built his name, real estate quietly became one of his most important personal wealth engines. Just not the same way it almost destroyed him the first time. The 26-year-old Ramsey borrowed to grow fast. The older Ramsey has said repeatedly that he buys real estate in cash. No mortgages, no leverage. He's talked about owning both commercial and residential property and about buying discounted real estate with cash in the years after the 2008 financial crisis. The exact size of that portfolio is hard to verify independently. Much of what's known comes from Ramsey's own account, but public records confirm the activity is substantial. In 2021, he sold an estate in Franklin, Tennessee for roughly $10.2 million. A custom-built home reportedly close to 15,000 square feet, sitting on several acres. At first glance, a mansion that size might seem like an odd fit for a man famous for telling people to cut up their credit cards. But that's exactly where his philosophy gets more interesting. That wealth shouldn't be enjoyed. His argument is that lifestyle should sit on top of real financial strength, not borrowed appearances. In his 20s, the Jaguar and the vacations were symbols stacked on a dangerously leveraged foundation. Decades later, the mansion sat inside a much bigger structure of businesses, cash flow, paid-off property, and intellectual property that couldn't be called in by a bank. The object looked the same. The foundation underneath it was nothing alike. That distinction is the whole story, really. Two people can drive the same car. One owns it outright. The other is one missed paycheck from losing it. Two people can live in equally impressive houses. One has a balance sheet to match. The other is spending every dollar just to maintain the illusion. Lifestyle doesn't tell you who's actually wealthy. The balance sheet does. Generosity became part of the message too. In 2020, Ramsey Solutions bought up roughly $10 million in medical and auto debt and simply forgave it, a move that reportedly helped around 8,000 people. It came from the company, not as a personal gift from Dave Ramsey himself, but it reflected a principle he preaches constantly. Money should eventually let you give without putting your own household at risk. So what was Dave Ramsey's real mistake? It wasn't real estate. That became the backbone of his fortune. It wasn't ambition. That's what built a national company out of a local radio slot. The real mistake was handing control of his future to someone else. His entire early strategy only worked as long as lenders kept saying yes. The moment one of them said no, the whole structure that had made him look powerful turned out to be the same structure that made him powerless. That's why the bankruptcy matters more than any net worth estimate ever could. It explains the emergency fund obsession. It explains the resistance to debt. It explains why he'd rather own a smaller thing outright than a bigger thing on borrowed money. His entire philosophy is a scar tissue response to one very specific injury. Not everyone agrees with the prescription, and that's fair. Plenty of financial professionals point out that debt, used carefully, can be a legitimate tool, that some of his rules are more rigid than the average person's situation calls for. Those are reasonable disagreements, but it's worth remembering his system wasn't built in a classroom. It was built by someone who watched his own leveraged fortune disappear the moment a lender decided it wanted its money back. That's not theory. That's a memory with interest attached. And underneath the disagreements, there are a handful of lessons here that have nothing to do with whether you agree with Dave Ramsey specifically. Income is not wealth. You can earn a fortune and still be one bad month from collapse if every dollar of it is already spoken for. Equity is not liquidity. A property or a business can be worth a great deal and still be useless the exact moment you need cash and can't get to it fast enough. Control has its own financial value. Lower fixed expenses and accessible savings buy you time. And time is what lets you survive a layoff, a downturn, or a slow quarter without everything falling apart at once. And maybe the least obvious lesson, failure can become intellectual property. Ramsey didn't bury his bankruptcy. He turned it into the origin story, studied it, extracted principles from it, and built an entire business teaching other people how to avoid his own mistake. The event that ended his first fortune became the credibility behind his second. There's one more piece worth sitting with. Patience looks foolish right up until it looks brilliant. When markets are hot, sitting on cash feels like doing nothing. Watching other people move faster, borrow more, and grow quicker can be its own kind of pressure. But when the market eventually turns, the person holding cash and low obligations ends up with something far more valuable than speed. They end up with options. Ramsey has said outright that he was able to buy discounted real estate after 2008 because he had cash on hand while other owners were forced to sell. That's the full circle of his story. In his 20s, financial pressure forced him to sell everything he had. Decades later, financial strength let him buy while everyone else was the one under pressure. Same kind of market event, completely opposite outcome, because the man underneath it had rebuilt himself from the ground up. Most people watching this will never build a national radio show, sell millions of books, or assemble a real estate portfolio like his. That was never really the takeaway. The takeaway is smaller and more useful. Stop measuring progress by appearances. Build the emergency fund before you upgrade the lifestyle. Ask whether a purchase is buying you freedom or quietly buying you another obligation. Build more than one source of income if you can. Turn what you know into something you actually own. And structure your finances so that one bad phone call can't take the whole thing down. Dave Ramsey's story usually gets told as bankruptcy to hundreds of millions of dollars. But the money was never really the point of the story. The real transformation was from dependence to control, from borrowing to ownership, from selling property to survive, to building a business out of an idea, from a man nearly wiped out by one financial mistake to a man who turned that exact mistake into an empire. Dave Ramsey isn't famous because he never failed. He's famous because he failed completely, lived through what came next, and then built a system specifically designed to make sure he'd never be that powerless again. The system made him influential, the audience made him famous, and the business he built around that audience made him wealthy. If you enjoyed this one, stay a while, because on Net Worth Decode, the headline number is almost never the most interesting part of the story. It's everything underneath it.